So, let's talk about some Dungeons and Dragons. What? Let me explain. This is important, so I want you not to sleep on this. Frank, I'm looking at you. Dungeons and Dragons is a tabletop RPG where you go on adventures with your friends, going through dungeons and slaying dragons, though it doesn't have to be dragons. On screen is a prompt that I wrote in order to explain how Dungeons and Dragons is the most popular tabletop RPG in America. Though there are a bunch of other, tabletop RPGs that are like Call of Cthulhu and various other things like Mutants and Masterminds, but we're not talking about those guys. First things first. My English class was studying the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, which detailed the various opportunities and hidden advantages that are found in our everyday lives. I'll be using Malcolm Gladwell's ideas in Outliers to find the success in Dungeons & Dragons, and how it is sweep the tabletop RPG scene compared to all other tabletop RPGs. Now, there are many variables that may have accounted for Dungeons & Dragons' success, but I'm mainly looking at the social media aspect of this. Specifically, videos and streaming shows online that made the game popular through media. First, we'll look at cultural advantages, and I think there's one show that can attribute to the game's success. If you didn't already know, Stranger Things is a Netflix original show premiering in 2016, and by the end of the first season, gained popular acclaim by many teens. As expressed by the Daily Dot, Stranger Things showed many aspects relating to Dungeons & Dragons, with even mirroring the campaign that the boys were doing in the show, with the Demogorgon being similar to that creature found in the Upside Down. But here's the kicker. Between the first and second season of Stranger Things, D&D searches rose by 20%, and an additional 50% within 2 years of the second and third seasons. As shown on screen, you can see that there is a clear distinction between these two graphs, but there's one thing in common. Around 2015, an increase in D&D and Stranger Things searches increased at almost the exact same time. Now, is this the only cultural advantage Dungeons & Dragons had? Of course not. There was obviously a second one, but this one had to do more with timing rather than coincidence. And I've got 2 words for you. Critical Role. Now, for those of you who don't know, Critical Role is a D&D web series released in 2015. This was 1 year after the initial core rulebooks were released for Dungeons & Dragons. Now, the timing couldn't have been better. At that point, Dungeons & Dragons was starting to regain some traction, and the show was just feeding into it. So when new players were going into the hobby, they just saw Critical Role and thought, "Whoa, these guys are amazing!" And that sparked more interest in a lot of people, more than just old D&D fans. Both Screen Rant and CNBC have agreed that Critical Role has attributed to Dungeons & Dragons' success, with steady increase as it goes on, with Critical Role even going into its 3rd season. Now, there's one aspect that I forgot to mention, but I find it's very important considering the culture that surrounds Dungeons & Dragons. Nerds. Now, Dungeons & Dragons is a culture swept up in nerds, and as stated by US Today, that community has changed a lot over the years. As stated by Satine Phoenix, she saw that people she never expected would have come to a D&D game, and she would probably have 6 to 10 people at each table. And people like David Price also have noticed the diversity in the D&D community, more than just nerds. There's even kids at 10 years old that want to play, and even old retirees want to come and play Dungeons & Dragons. News outlets like The Guardian have made similar claims, with James Newman, a professor of media, noting the face-to-face interaction and the physicality of Dungeons & Dragons, and how it's been different to other digital games of the era. In a way, Dungeons & Dragons can be played by anybody. But what can we take away from all this? Now, I think it's important to note that Dungeons & Dragons is a game that was built on the success of opportunities that they took. Stranger Things came out at just the right time, so did Critical Role, and they, in turn, built up Dungeons & Dragons. And even now, the stigma of the nerd has changed over time, and the game has changed. And I think it's important to note that with changing opportunities, you too can even change your own success. And I think we can learn even from games like Dungeons and Dragons, that change is possible and that you can succeed from it. Thank you for watching.